Okay, welcome back, everyone. It's been a great day. My name is Brett Norton, once again from Beyond Clean, and like I said, it's been an incredible day of learning. Wanted to once again point out some quick housekeeping, just pointers, and wanted to make sure that if you're having issues with your screen, if something freezes up, if you're not getting any sound, make sure to try and refresh your browser or clear your cache. That should fix the issue. About 99% of the time, it does fix the issue. So just a couple of housekeeping notes there. Wanted to once again thank you all for being engaged with the discussions we were having today. And as a reminder, in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you'll find many downloadable documents that have been provided for you by our event sponsor and speakers. Our next speaker, Dr. Nita Mazerat, is a developer of new infection prevention and control IPAC guidelines for the Manitoba Dental Association. She is also a member of the Canadian Standard Association's Technical Committee, where she is responsible for the development and revision of Canadian medical devices reprocessing. Dr. Nita is a passionate educator, and she continues to write and lecture on the current topics in infection prevention and control and reprocessing for oral healthcare professionals. How do you set your dental office up for success? Nita is here to help answer this critical question. And as part of one of today's three-part series, Nita will explore the criteria and guidelines your dental office should follow for optimal success. Get ready to discover how the use of standard operating procedures, manufacturers' IFUs, and office design can positively impact the success of your dental office. You will not want to miss this session. Let's welcome Dr. Nita Mazerat.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for that lovely introduction. As he said, you're going to be with you for 3 sessions. I think very wisely, I pre-recorded 2 of them. I'm an absolute techno idiot. I had visions of not being able to do this properly. And so we pre-recorded 2 of them, but I'll be here live. And I also want to say how much I've enjoyed the presentations that I've seen. You've all been saying exactly the same sort of things that I'm going to be saying with documentation and traceability and so on. So it has just been delightful to hear you talking about this. As a disclaimer, the content is based on current Canadian information as of right now. Requirements in other countries are definitely different. U.S. guidance may change in the future, and things that I say today, please don't shut me out, but they are largely Canadian. I tried to be as inclusive as possible, but I'm not knowledgeable on many of the American regulations as much as, say, people who are with ST79. Always consult your product instructions for use and follow your local laws and regulations, as many of the speakers today have already said. And it contains an overview of general information, and please don't rely on anything ever without doing it in context. And when you have to make decisions, you need to do that in relationship to your context. Thank you, 3M. Just as one further addition to my bio, I am indeed a dentist, and I'm a retired associate prof. I was in charge of a lot of things, but regulatory compliance was one of them. And then eventually I've joined Canadian Standards Association, and that is our Z314 8-18 is very similar to ST79. So I'm fairly familiar with those regulations. Our learning objectives for the entire series is to be able to look at the role of planning and contingency plans, to look at what happens when things fail, how do we keep them monitored, to look at traceability and recall as part of failures, and mostly to talk about sterility assurance. As you know, ST79 actually has the phrase sterility assurance in its title. The objective for this presentation, the current presentation number 1, is to look at the criteria for sterility assurance, to provide you with some guidance. We keep on talking about you have to have your own standard operating procedures. Well, hopefully I can give you a little bit of insight as to how to do that. It's daunting. I hear you. I understand that, but you have to do it. Because as Lisa just said, document, document, document. Everybody's saying that, everybody. So you start by having standard operating procedures, discussing the role of manufacturer's instructions for use. Perhaps in the United States, you're much more familiar with IFUs. Canadian dentists, I'm finding, are saying, we call them MIFUs. We're saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. What's a MIFU? So we'll talk about that a bit, and also talking about the influence of design on standard operating procedures and how that relates to guidelines, to how do you fit in your office, how do you tailor your office to existing regulations and guidelines. So sterility. It's a necessary state for medical device reuse. We would never think to not reprocess our instruments. I think back how I did when I was a student. We had this boat of high-level disinfectant in the bottom of our cabinets, and we would sort of wash our instruments, throw stuff into there, and at the end of or at the beginning of the next session, we would take them out of there and rinse them off and use them on our patients. I'm just flabbergasted that I can say that in my lifetime that was happening. So we've come a long way, baby. Sterilization is a very difficult concept. To think in terms of nothingness is very difficult for us. So it's because of that we depend on having a process. We have to have sterility assurance. It's the gold standard performance to ensure patient safety. I'm going to read you the definitions right out of the Canadian Standards Association standards, because I think it's a very good definition. It's an integrated sterility assurance is the integrated system of tests, controls, and backup procedures intended to ensure that reprocessed medical devices are sterile when delivered. So it's the whole gamut. It's everything that we do to ensure that the devices that we're using, I'm going to use the word devices for the most part, because instruments are underneath the guideline or underneath the rainbow of devices. So it's everything that we do to make sure that everything is sterile for patient use. In other words, safe for patient use. So how is it achieved? First of all, you need to develop your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, and you do that by accessing your state or provincial guidelines, because they've already done it for you. They've made them a much easier. Our CSA guidelines are almost 600 pages. So very few offices are going to own them, because we have to pay. I don't know if they're $600 or if they're 600 pages. They're big and they're expensive. They're not available online. So our Provincial Dental Association actually takes that, distills them, makes them for the dental office. And then we apply appropriate tests and monitors to ensure that you've got a sterile endpoint, develop plans, and we've heard many speakers this morning say train staff, make sure that your staff are trained, and we train for failures as part of standard operating procedures, and document. As I said, everybody's talking about documentation. So what are standards? Standards are almost like rules or best practices, really, developed by expert groups utilizing best evidence, set of rules for reprocessing for patient safety, as I said, as AMI ST79 in the US and CSA Z314 in Canada. They're adapted to dental needs, as I said, by your state or provincial infection prevention and control committees. They're published for the members of those associations, and as possibly it was Lisa Kane who said, even though they may be called best practices, be well aware that if there was ever a complaint, they're law. You need to follow those best practices. Sometimes they are a true law from the federal or local authorities, and I think particularly in terms of California, which that requires the use of sterile water now for propotomies. You need to develop your own standard operating procedures. They're written documents that state how your office accomplishes the requirements of the standard. I always think of it this way. I'm the dentist. I get a call on Sunday night from my IPAC coordinator, and she says, "Good news, Dr. Mazrap." I'm retired, by the way, so this won't happen. But good news. I just won the $64 million lottery. Bad news is I won't be in on Monday morning. Well, if we've got the standard operating procedures, everybody already knows how to do everything. So they're used as training documents. They report what's being done, how it's supposed to be done. It's also really useful because we can use them to adjust or correct gaps if we discover them. When we're looking at provincial or state regulations from our dental licensing boards, then we say, we're not doing it that way. We're supposed to test our water. Well, you shock and then you test, and we're supposed to be doing that at least quarterly. We're not doing that at all. As a matter of fact, I don't know what testing means. So it corrects those gaps. So it's useful as a training method as well. Staff need to understand the rationale for required changes. And when they become empowered when they get to be able to speak about that. So their input for how to change is really, really important. It's vital. It needs to reflect the reality in the office design and how to best adapt to the required standards. By writing those SOPs, you're standardized. Everybody's on the same page. You've got team coherence. You don't have somebody saying, you're talking about, oh, I don't like the way such and such. I don't like the way Mary does it, so I'm going to do it my own way. No. You've got team coherence. Mary and Jane talked about it during the development of this, and we've looked at the standards, and we're going to follow it this way. And everybody knows that, and that's all there is to it. It encourages people to share their ideas for positive change, improves the interpretation of concepts or language, because sometimes the language that is used, definitely I know in the standards, but even what the provincial or state associations will provide, that language sometimes is difficult. So it's an interpretation and making sure that we know what that actually means. It invites training to address shortcomings in staff training and recognition, as I said before, recognition of gaps in the procedures. And it's used as a training tool for new staff, because then they kind of start to understand the culture of the office just doing that. So by using those standards, you have to read them, have to list your best practices required. And what is the language that they're using? Are they saying shall? Are they using the words must, need, should? Should usually means you should, but it doesn't mean shall. It doesn't mean you absolutely have to do that, or can, or may. What is the language that's being used at that? Usually it's in your document, but you need to understand what those actually mean. And then you need to state in your office how you're going to do it, how training will be accomplished in your office, and it's fact, not fiction, not just decided, just on the whim. That doesn't happen anymore. That's not how we do things. So these are all the steps. When I still hear people use the word disinfect or confusing the terms disinfection and sterilization, or using the term sterilization for reprocessing, I want to whip out, something that I can, maybe a picture or something on my phone. I probably wouldn't be able to do that. But to be able to show all the steps for reprocessing, all the way from starts at the chair where you're actually cleaning off, removing your materials at point of care, and all the way through to use of those sterile instruments again for aseptic presentation. So the entire loop, I call it, or circle or cycle. Really important to think about each one of those steps when you're developing your standard operating procedures. So, for example, cleaning at point of care, and we know that that's where we have a lot of the problems, because we've got materials that are hard to remove after they dry or set. You need to, if you list those materials and then receive manufacturer's instructions for use from the companies that actually are providing you with those materials. They're the only ones who know the composition of that material, and so they're the only ones who know how to remove that material properly. So I think we're going to start to see that more and more as we ask for it. Because if we're not removing those materials at point of care, we have materials at setting, and it is causing a great deal of time, wasting time, resources to be able to clean them. So this is an example of how this information can be organized in your standard operating procedures. I apologize, on my screen it looks like we've got a mix-up here in terms of the formatting, but just an example. I really like tables. I think tables are, at a glance you can see what's going on. So list your materials used, and then your manufacturer's instructions. And if you don't have them, at least state, call the company, call the manufacturer, or ask the rep. Now, those aren't going to be validated instructions from the rep, but at least it shows that we're starting to ask about those instructions. So providing rationale for knowing why. For the cleaning at point of care, for removing the materials at chair side. If we don't do it, as I said, you're going to need extra resources of time and costs. You're going to need time required for the removal, and it could be multiplied by the number of procedures that you do that day for using that type of material. If you've got pictures of materials left on the devices or damage to instruments or devices from use of incorrect cleaning agents when the materials are allowed to dry, that's a really powerful way to train. Cost of instrument replacements. You don't want to increase the budget in your office because you're not cleaning at point of care. For example, examples for the next step, for instrument gathering, state who's the staff. Which staff are responsible? And best if you just provide a title, not the actual name of the people, because people go on mat leave, people leave, they retire, and so on. So the title, and if it's not already in your IPAC coordinators or your manual, then you put it into into a table, for example, for this. So when is it performed? What PPE is required for that? So state the requirements from the standards. And then this process will continue for every step for reprocessing. As I said, I really like tables. Some of the information is better as ordered lists. Some are really good as posters or photographs. And your formatting really will make a difference in your office. If you've got text, sometimes that's more difficult for some people to read than PowerPoints. But you do need to use plain, straightforward language that everybody is comfortable with so that the instructions are clear and detailed, and no gaps, no assumptions, no surprises, and they're easily changed. Some strategies for design, I'll be talking about briefly later in the presentation. And some of the steps require information that can only be provided by manufacturer's instructions for use. As a matter of fact, many of them. So let's talk about manufacturer's instructions for use. In Canada, known as MIFUs. In the United States, known as IFUs. In Europe, known as DIFUs, directions for use. As you're developing your standard operating procedures, you'll notice that you're going to need help with completing some of the steps, as I've already mentioned. So how do I pre-clean? Check with your materials manufacturers. How do I clean or sterilize the instruments? Those go to the instructions for those are from the manufacturers of those devices or instruments. Again, only the manufacturer knows the materials and the construction that was used to fabricate the device, and they're the ones who know how best to prepare it for safe reuse for patient care, how to clean it. And I think Peggy Spitzer is going to be talking about cleaning. I really look forward to that presentation so that she can introduce you to water quality, detergents, enzymes, brushes. We're very guilty in dentistry for using toothbrushes and denture brushes. Like let's use real brushes as the manufacturer suggests. So manufacturer's instructions for use, criteria for manufacturers. Manufacturers in North America follow the an ISO document 17664, and the information to be provided by the medical device manufacturer for the reprocessing of medical devices. They're required to do that. In the United States, it's provided in ANSI ISO 17664, actually TIR 2020, for designing, testing, and labeling medical devices intended for processing by healthcare facilities, and in Canada by the Health Canada guidance document, information to be provided by manufacturers for the reprocessing and sterilization of reusable medical devices. Learning about these pieces of information that are available to us, it's almost like having a rights for consumers was such an enabling piece of information for me, saying, wow, I'm supposed to get this information. It's actually supposed to be provided to me. That is so eye-opening, so empowering. It was just wonderful to get that. So the criteria follow the process step by step to provide you with the information that you need to reprocess your devices properly. You need to know them, and you need to look at manufacturer's instructions for use prior to purchase. That's the time to get those instructions for use. Look or ask for validated instructions for use that cover all the steps. That's the only time that you're going to really encourage people to get those, the manufacturers, to get those for you. Cleaning at point of use, you, as I said 3 times now, from the dental materials manufacturers, not the device manufacturers, but for cleaning, that's from the manufacturers of your dental devices. So cleaning, drying, packaging, sterilization parameters, special instructions for storage. Yeah, really, how eye-opening, how terrific to know that those are available for you. So your responsibilities then, ask for validated instructions before you purchase. Follow the instructions. Don't make them up. No substitutions. Don't ignore criteria because you don't have that equipment or you don't understand the requirement. Do not your own instructions. So what does validated mean? I've used the term validated manufacturer's instructions for use. It means that it's true, that the manufacturer has sent their device plus their instructions for reprocessing to either another division of their own company or to an outside company that tests these instructions and affirms that when reprocessed in that method that's been outlined, in other words, the instructions that you're going to get, that the device will be safe for use and reuse on patients. Validated. Really important word for you to start using in your vocabulary. Devices that are very similar, that do not have to be validated again, but the instructions need to be available for all devices, regardless of the class of device upon purchase. The importance of requesting your instructions for use before the purchase, it's because you need to make sure that it has been licensed as a healthcare device and is therefore safe to use and reuse on patients. In the United States, I'm going to get in trouble with this. FDA, I believe. In Canada, of course, Health Canada. You need to know that those instructions are clear, validated, they've been provided, and without instructions for performing the steps for reprocessing, you can't perform those steps. It's not a question of may not or must not. You cannot. You don't know how. I think in terms of a vehicle, I've purchased a vehicle. No, I won a vehicle, but there are no instructions there's no dashboard and there are no instructions for use. That's the way I think about reprocessing instruments without the use of MIFUs or IFUs. I apologize. So again, do not make up your own instructions ever. Also, do you have the required equipment for reprocessing available in your office? For example, if the MIFUs ask for or state that you need to use a washer disinfector, and you don't have a washer disinfector, you have an automated washer, a medical washer, but not a washer disinfector. What a difference. Can I still clean them? What happens? What if I don't have either? I only have an ultrasonic cleaner, or I have to do it manually. Can I still, should I purchase this? So you need to talk to the manufacturer first and get those instructions first. Otherwise, you can't use it. So use only equipment and supplies that are manufactured for the intention of its use. For example, real cleaning brushes, not toothbrushes or denture brushes. Automated medical washers are not household washers. So here's an example of ensuring that your equipment ensuring that your equipment can actually be cleaned before purchase. Can not only be cleaned, but can be sterilized. So the instructions stated sterilize at 121 or 250 Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, gravity sterilization cycle. Do you have a gravity sterilizer in your office? As a matter of fact, do you know what kind of a sterilizer you have? Do you have gravity or do you have dynamic? So if you don't have gravity, and I'm not recommending gravity, I prefer that people are using dynamics, but if you don't have a gravity sterilizer, you need to call the manufacturer to provide alternate instructions for your dynamic air removal sterilizer, either your pre-vac or your steam flush pressure pulse. If you don't get those manufacturer's instructions for use, then you really shouldn't purchase that, because how are you going to sterilize? And if you've already purchased it, you're going to have to replace it before you use it, or treat it as a single-use device and discard it after one use. If you've just purchased something that costs not $20 but $2,000 and you can't reprocess it, trouble. That's all there is to it. It's going to be trouble. And we also have things that are called sacred cows. These are the procedures that have been done for so long that they've become grandfathered or become normalized. The most common of these are sterilization of cotton products such as gauze and cotton pellets, cotton rolls, cotton tipped applicators, even irrigation syringes, bulb syringes, single-use, they rarely come with instructions for use because really they can't be reprocessed. So the same concept applies. Without instructions for use, they cannot be reprocessed. So if you need them sterile, you need to purchase that sterile. And I know everybody's looking at each other right now saying, what did she just say? Yeah, sorry. It's a sacred cow. Gauze that required, if you require it sterile, unless your manufacturer of the gauze, cotton pellets, cotton rolls, cotton tipped applicators, single-use irrigation syringes, for example, if they don't come with manufacturer's instructions for use, you cannot reprocess those items. So start looking there. I have heard from users that indeed there are some of those available with manufacturer's instructions for use. So look for them. Otherwise, you need to purchase them sterile if that's the way that you need to do that. And the one comment about sacred cows are just because we've been doing it for so long doesn't make it right. So the difference between standards and manufacturer's instructions for use. Again, standards are developed by a group or panel of experts, usually a huge committee that draws from users, university people, so academics, PhDs who understand processes, from manufacturers, a beautiful diversity of experts who develop these best practices, and they're developed to protect the safety of patients and the staff who prepare the devices for patient use. The manufacturer's instructions for use are developed by the manufacturer, one more time, because they and only they know how it's developed, the materials that are used, and how these are best cleaned to get the best life from that product, from that device. And it's to provide the instructions for use of the equipment to maintain its function and how it was designed to operate. The instructions for use will provide directions for operating the equipment, whereas the standards provide the requirements for frequency of testing, for example, to demonstrate continual efficacy. The role of design in sterility assurance. We know that it's an aerosol. We know that dentistry is an aerosol generating profession. We've just gone through the last 18 months being bombarded with reminders that we are an aerosol generating profession. Canada affected much more than the United States. We had offices that were closed down for months and months, or who did just very simple procedures. We had the same problems, of course, with acquiring PPE that you had in the United States. So we have this constant reminder of it being a general aerosol, an aerosol generating profession. But there is no change to the way reprocessing is done due to COVID. However, for the first time, many dental offices are becoming aware of the concepts of air exchange, especially negative pressure. The concept, of course, is being more accepted when discussing elements of ideal design for reprocessing, because the cleaning area is preferably a negative pressure area, and the air being removed is exhausted to the outdoors and minimally is filtered. The instructions from the standards team and from ANSI, from AMI ST79 have in the past applied mostly to hospitals. Hospitals have to follow that in order to be accredited. We're more and more community settings are following the standards, and we're sort of dealing with the discomfort of the fact that we have probably never followed all of the standards, especially with design and especially with negative pressure. We now have some offices in Canada that have placed negative pressure in operatories. So at least we have a place to send patients who are, for example, tuberculosis, active tuberculosis patients. We haven't had that in the past. But we have not had offices who have placed negative pressure in their decontamination or cleaning area. So now the awareness is starting to increase, becoming aware that this needs to be followed. And there are offices, as I say, that are starting to do that. So design is part of the reprocessing standards. Good design allows seamless movement. I think everybody knows that you need to go in a one-way pattern to accommodate the workflow from contaminated to clean to packaged and sterile in a manner that's safe for the workers and results in devices that are safe for patient care. Physical barriers or walls are used to segregate the soiled area from the clean area to prevent contaminants from recontaminating clean devices. Preferably, though, we have separate rooms with the cleaning area, as I said, in negative pressure, and then there's a flow through. There's a way to be able to pass through the instruments from that negative area to the clean area. So if you were at least to use a piece of plexiglass just distal, just on the other side of where the instruments have been cleaned, not dried, but cleaned, then you would be helping yourself immensely in the design for doing that. Criteria. So, how do we adapt in our offices? So, for example, restricted processing area. Well, here are some of the criteria. I'm going to go through how we can adapt in our individual areas. So, some of the criteria that are required: restricted access, doors, hand hygiene stations at the entrance to and exit from the decontamination area, plumbing and sink requirements, flooring, work surfaces, walls, ceilings, backsplashes, lighting and magnification, really important. HVAC, we're learning how important that is. Humidity, temperature, air exchange, storage for supplies, storage for PPE for the cleaning area and for the clean area, because you do need to change your PPE between the cleaning area and the clean area. Notice I'm being extremely careful about using the term cleaning area rather than decontam, because I'll explain it later as to why. But I'm stumbling over it. There's a reason that I'm doing that. Storage at receiving for contaminated devices and storage for sterile devices. So your SOPs need to tailor the challenges of the reality of your office, sort of, best you can to meet the requirements. Document it. State, we know that this is what's required. This is what we're doing, and this is what we're doing to mitigate this the very best way that we can. So we're becoming acutely aware of the value and requirement of the designs. Offices that are designing new builds or renos are seeking contractors who are familiar with those criteria for healthcare and specifically for reprocessing. Office reprocessing area design determines how some of the standard operating procedures need to be tailored. So, as I said, those are the what am I going to do in my area. Ideally, the space for reprocessing is planned during building or renos. I've developed offices for myself. Of course, that was back in the time also when we were using high-level disinfection for devices. So, you have to excuse that one. But did we think about reprocessing? Did we plan the office around that? I think there was a really good commercial for a plumbing fixture. Husband and wife came into an architect's office and they brought in a faucet and they said, design my house around this faucet. And I thought, wow, that's like reprocessing. That is really great. Okay, so we should really be planning our entire office around the reprocessing area. So you have to do that during building our renos more frequently than not. It's the leftovers. It's that little space that you get between the lab, if you actually had a lab, and the staff area. So often that area is really compact. All you've got is a sink, little tiny bit of area for your, for placing your devices when they're contaminated, little tiny area for packaging, and that's about it. Lighting hasn't been considered, plumbing hasn't been considered, all of those sorts of things. So you need to have a space that's separate. Absolutely, this is an absolute, separate from patient treatment. I've been in offices where all there is a little counter space and a sterilizer, and maybe a sink. And they're in the same area where the patient care is going on. Don't do that. You need a one-way workflow. You need sinks that are dedicated to device cleaning and accommodate largest devices. You need physical separation between the cleaning area and the clean area. So you need space for hand hygiene at the entrance and the exit of the cleaning area. So if nothing else, and again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but if you need a hand hygiene area, it doesn't have to be a hand washing area. So if your hands are clean, you could actually use, alcohol-based hand rubs. You could have a station for that if you needed to, if that was the way that you could accommodate. You need storage. You need performance of steps after cleaning, performing your sterilization and your incubation. You need room for documentation. So how to adapt your design for cleaning and lubrication of hand pieces. The IFUs of many of the hand pieces require that excess cleaner or lubricant is expelled following cleaning, even when you are using an automated system. Read your IFUs, your IFUs, for your hand pieces. Does it say to purge again, even after using an automated system? So if many offices would ignore that because it is almost impossible to do your lubrication and cleaning in an automated system and then take it back into the operatory. It's the wrong way. Remember, we need a one-way flow. So, and the operatory, chances are the operatory is already set up for the next patient, or it's clean, it's decontaminated. Where are you going to do that? So adding an airline in the reprocessing area allows this step to be performed without returning to the operatory. You purge it then into a paper towel and inspect the quality. Look at the quality of the excess. Is it dirty? Do you maybe need to? It's like testing. We heard that wonderful presentation on testing water lines. Well, it's wonderful because it's right now. So this is kind of a way of knowing that you've lubricated and that it's clean. When you purge, does the purged lubricant excess lubricant and cleaner come out clean, or is it still dirty? And if it's still dirty, put it back in, purge it again, clean it again, put it again, and then purge again, and look at that. Is it clean? Because if it's dirty, obviously you're not going to be cleaning, you're not going to be sterilizing your handpiece. And if you don't purge it, the excess lubricant and cleaner are expelled during sterilization and they act like soil. And that'll result in a handpiece that's not sterile. Noticeable in that the handpiece feels oily following sterilization and it changes color, like that slide or the picture on my right hand side that says it's not purged following lubrication. I was going to say something else about that. If I haven't mentioned it, nope, I didn't. With hand pieces, so many people, for whatever reason, seem to think that as soon as you put your handpiece into the automated cleaner lubricant, that the inside and the outside of the handpiece is clean. I don't know what would make people think that. There is no way that the outside is going to be clean unless your automated system allows for that. So you always have to clean the outside of your handpiece according to your manufacturer's instructions for use. And if there aren't any, you need to ask the manufacturer for help as to the best way to do that. Everything that you used, whether you're doing it manually, you generally cannot put a handpiece into an ultrasonic cleaner. Can I put it into my washer disinfector? Can I put it into my automated washer? So potential strategies. Until such time that your office can accommodate to all the standards as required by AAMI or CSA, our community offices need to at least be aware of requirements. That's the first step. First step is a great starting point. These are called off-standard accommodations, and they're preferable to ignoring acceptable best practices. Always remember this. Patients are patients regardless of their setting. Doesn't matter if they're in your office or in a hospital setting. They expect the same standards, and not only do they expect, they assume same standards regardless of their setting. So design accommodations are tolerated. However, clean, packaged, sterile devices are non-negotiables. So here's some strategies. That's what I was getting ahead of myself back there. So existing. So if you've got restrictions to personnel entering the area, use some signage. Inadequate space for hand hygiene sinks. Use alcohol-based hand rub stations. If you've got inadequate space for transport containers at receiving, use some supported hinged shelving at existing countertops, or use some mobile carts. That hinged shelving can be brought up for use when you need it and then brought down when you don't need it. If you've got inadequate time to clean immediately and inadequate space for allowing pre-cleaning, using enzymes or towels wetted with water, if you're able to leave the instruments inside the transport containers, apply your enzymes or minimally some wetted towels or devices inside the transport containers. Please don't put those transport containers on the floor. That's a no-no. Use of a single small sink. Well, you're supposed to be using basins of adequate size. Replace your sinks with sinks of adequate size. If nothing else, if you don't have room for the adequate or correct numbers of sinks, at least replace your sink with a sink of adequate size. And I'm sure that Peggy's going to be touching on that, and the fact that we in Canada at least need at least 2 sinks. Adaptation. So the use of pullouts, closed shelving units for storage, creative use of space. You've got some people that's what they specialize in, is creative use of space. Utilize those folks. They're wonderful. Use the ones who know about healthcare, though. So they'll assist in ergonomic development for staff so that your staff is not being injured, help to provide the assurance of safe, sterile devices for safe patient care. Here's a common question. Why? Thank goodness I provided that in this presentation, not in second or third. Why is the cleaning area sometimes cleaning and sometimes called decontam? Decontam is the cleaning and disinfection of medical devices so that they're safe to handle with bare hands following the cleaning process. I know that I've been in rooms where medical people are talking about reprocessing, and there are dental people there, and they talk about demonstrate how inspection and functionality and all those other packaging, all those steps are done following decontamination, and it's done with bare hands. People are always going, ooh, so accustomed to not decontaminate using washer disinfectors. So only when washer disinfectors are used, the end result is cleaning as well as disinfection, because we've used thermal disinfection. So in the final rinse, that water temperature is elevated and then maintained at that temperature. to result in thermal disinfection. We don't necessarily use washer disinfectors in dentistry. So the advantage, of course, and you can imagine all those advantages. After cleaning then, after disinfection, after decontamination, the devices can be handled with bare hands for all of the subsequent steps in completing the reprocessing, and that reduces the amount of use of PPE and careful mindful handling of packaging and loading. I'm not advocating that you're willy-nilly, that you're not thinking about what you're doing, but at least you're working with instruments that are decontaminated. You can work with them with bare hands. And also, I said, the handle of the sterilizer is touched. How much are you thinking about that in your office? If you're going, for example, if you were using the same PPE all the way from cleaning to opening your sterilizer, think about that. Do you think that that when you remove your packages from your sterilizer and you've contaminated the handle of the sterilizer, that you should put those into storage? Boy, so we need a whole new set or a whole set of standard operating procedures that are going to tell you how to prevent from doing that. So I hope that I developed the presentation, and I hope that it has helped you for increased awareness of sterility assurance, to review the use of standards, to assist in the development of tailored standard operating procedures tailored to your office alone. You can't borrow them from other people. Emphasize the importance of getting those manufacturer's instructions before you purchase anything. So developing a device manufacturer instruction inventory to assist you in knowing what to request, and to make sure that you request those prior to purchase of devices and equipment, and to assist in the adaptation of existing design to the standards through the standard operating procedures that are developed and tailored to your individual offices. And I hope you have fun with doing that. Get started. Get started really soon. Thank you so much. I hope that you'll join me with presentations 2 and 3. And since I won't be live at that time, I want to thank Brett and the whole crew and 3M again for allowing me to babble for these 3 hours, and hopefully some of helpful for you.
Okay. Thank you so much for that one. That was a great presentation. A lot of material to cover, so I hope there's enough to digest for our audience. I think there is. And, I've got a few questions here, and this one could probably have a couple of stages. But, I've been in dental offices before, and I've also heard conversation at dental conferences where, yes, you've got lots of patients coming in and out of the office, and you're trying to turn over as many chairs as you can and accommodate as many patients as you can throughout the scheduled day. And I've often heard the comment of, I don't have time to reprocess my instruments. So what are some suggestions that you could tell our audience to move past that line of thinking? Maybe some simple steps. Obviously, of course, you need to develop a standard operating procedure when it comes to cleaning and disinfection, but maybe some simple tactics so offices can start to adopt and move past that. I don't want to say it's an excuse, because it's not, but it's, it is a reality. But time can get in the way, but it's also important to make sure those instruments are clean. So, your thoughts?
I have a comment that was given to me by a friend, and it's really a helpful comment. Maybe, or maybe not. Something's not a problem if it can be solved with money. So, the point being that if you have a large inventory, then you can do that. You're going to have to solve it. There's no simple solution to that one. You either need to hire more people or have more instruments. The reality is that you cannot use instruments that are not properly reprocessed, that they're not properly clean for patients, and that they're not reprocessed properly. There is no getting away from that. That's all there is to it. No simple solutions. We have to have an awareness that this is the way it has to be done. We can save a lot of time by for example, doing cleaning at point of care, being very mindful of how we set up the practice. How do we set up the reprocessing area so that you're not ever going backwards, not looking for PPE, having to go backwards, saving 15 seconds at a time makes such a difference. Using automated equipment, using washer disinfectors, making sure that you're using your instruments your equipment properly, testing your equipment. We waste a lot of time if we're not testing, and therefore the equipment's not cleaning properly. As mentioned earlier, again, I think it was Lisa who commented about aluminum foil tests in ultrasonics. Also, washer disinfectors and automated washers need to be tested daily to make sure that they're working most efficiently. So we save bits of time by working smart, by working efficiently, by having our standard operating procedures, not reprocessing. And what's your other choice? You have to do that. Functionality, you're wasting time if you're working with dull instruments. You're putting yourself at risk, patients at risk, if you're using dull instruments, for example. So functionality is part of this as well. And what if you've got dirty instruments and you pick it up ready to use it on a patient and you say, can I please have can I have another instrument? You won't probably ever in front of a patient say a clean instrument, but it's that wastes time. So haste makes waste. Not doing it properly. I know I'm preaching. I'm regulatory, so it's very hard for me not to be preaching about this. But it's not a choice. We have to do this, and it has to be done properly. And staff have to be trained properly. Trained, period.
Yep. No, there's no question. Training and education is paramount when it comes to these crucial steps and procedures when it comes to patient safety, right? I mean, if there is an infection based on a dirty instrument, and this goes across the healthcare spectrum, how much more expensive is that going to be for your office or your practice when a patient gets sick, as opposed to taking the extra time to make sure that you're following the correct procedures and practices and processes, I guess, to where it's lined out and you are confident that you're not going to cause harm on the patient themselves. So I think there is a lot of responsibility when it comes to that. And, time is always our enemy when it comes to trying to do things, but it's also our friend if we're using it correctly. So I appreciate your insight on that. Probably have a time for one more question. And the other thing I also wanted to point out when it comes to time, and you shed light on this, was the point of use. If you're pre-treating your instruments, if there's blood and saliva and other type of gunk on there, so to speak, it really helps protect those instruments, because when you get them to the cleaning phase, it's already started the process. You're not going to be at the sink scrubbing away, trying to get blood and other debris off. Yeah.
Chipping at it, or breaking other instruments, trying to get it off. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yes. Thank you for commenting about the reputation. You only get one chance for a good reputation with your patients. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Good point.
It's very important. So then you mentioned the sacred cow, which I thought was a great segue into speaking towards the old adage of, I've heard this countless amount of times, whether it be in business or in healthcare or anywhere, we've always done it this way. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. I think that is probably the most crippling line of thinking when it comes to trying to ensure best practice. And yes, you might be utilizing something that is working, but can it be done better? I think there should be always the line of thinking that we can evolve and we can be more efficient by following practices, getting education, asking questions to, subject matter experts like yourself, making sure that we're involved in staying up to speed on all the current guidelines. So, is there anything else that you'd like to point out regarding, that whole line of thinking?
Yeah, I get that. The one that I get is it's very similar to eating at a restaurant. And I always point out that healthcare is healthcare. We it's not restaurants. And I also do ask, actually, in Manitoba, where I live, do you know the regulations for restaurants? Because they require two sinks. Do you have two sinks in your office? Right. So, I try not to engage in an argument. We've always done it this way. Yeah, I hear that all the time. But, again, we're healthcare providers, and one of our, what word can I use? As a healthcare, I think when we graduated, one of probably the common theme was that you need to continue your education, and that's part of this.
Right. Yep.
For sure.
No question. And that's why we're here, right?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Great segue.
So I guess that is probably it. We're about at time. And I just wanted to make sure that I'm reminding our audience that Dr. Mazarat has 2 more presentations to follow up with this one after Peggy upcoming. And Peggy's going to be great. So we're looking forward to that one. And if you have any questions for Dr. Mazarat, please make sure to send them either via her email, which is lined out on the bottom right hand of the page. And I will highlight that right now. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us directly. We're happy to move any questions towards Dr. Mazarat. But once again, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in about 13 minutes now. So on to the next session. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks.